Chapter 4 The Aborigines. When British people came to Australia in 1788, they gave the name Aborigine to the people they found there. About 300,000 Aborigines who lived in Australia at that time belonged to more than 300 different groups, and each group had its own land and language. They traveled to different parts of their land during the year to find food and water. They ate plants and fruits and caught animals and fish. They did not own many things, and their only buildings were houses made from branches and leaves. This way of life did not damage or destroy the land where they lived. At special times, Aborigines came together in big groups. They painted their bodies and sang, danced, and made music. They believed that a long time ago the world was made by animals, plants, and humans together. This time was called Dream Time, and there are many songs, stories, and pictures about it. After 1788, the way of life suddenly began to change. The new Australians thought that because the Aborigines moved from place to place, the land was not important to them. So they took a lot of Aboriginal land and water. In fact, the land was at the center of Aboriginal life. Thousands of Aborigines died in fights with the British or from the diseases that they brought to Australia. What happened in Tasmania is a terrible example. In 1804, there were between 4,000 and 6,000 Aborigines there. In 1831, there were 190. By 1876, there were none. Between 1900 and 1930, special places were made where the Aborigines had to live, far away from other Australians. There were now between 50,000 and 90,000 Aborigines living in Australia, and life was very difficult for them. They could not own land, they could not get jobs very easily, and their children could not go to school with white children. Nobody counted the Aborigines in the Australian population. Some people thought that there was no hope for the Aboriginal people, and many of their languages disappeared. In fact, after about 1940, the number of Aborigines began to grow again, and now there are about 460,000 in Australia, about 2.4% of the population. In some ways, life is better. For example, some of the land that the British took now belongs to the Aborigines again. By 2002, the Aborigines owned 14% of Australian land. But for lots of Aborigines, life is still difficult. Most now live in cities and towns, away from the land. The state with the largest number of the Aborigines, for example, is not an outback state like Northern Territory or Western Australia. It is New South Wales. Although some have been successful, many feel that they belong neither to Aboriginal Australia nor to White Australia. Aborigines have more health problems and short lives, about 17 years shorter than white Australians. They leave school earlier, and it is harder for them to get jobs. Many of them find the way to prison. About 20% of the people in Australian prisons are Aborigines, and they often have serious problems with alcohol. In recent years, people have begun to talk about another part of Australia's history. Between 1900 and 1969, many children, perhaps as many as 100,000, were taken away from their parents. Usually, they were children with the Aboriginal mother and the white father. They went to live in schools or with new parents, away from their homes and their own way of life. Many of them never saw their families again, and some didn't even know that they were part Aboriginal. In the late 1980s, people began to talk about this. In 1989, the first National Sorry Day was held in Australia to say sorry to the children who were taken away. Not all Australians agree about what happened, but they do now know about this dark time in Australia's past. The film Rabbit-Proof Hands made a lot of Australians think about the problems of Aborigines in the past and in the present. At last, now, in some cities, Aborigines are helping each other to learn about the Aboriginal way of life. Young people are taken to the country, where older Aborigines teach them the songs, dances, and way of living of the Aborigines of the past. And perhaps more white Australians are beginning to realize that they can learn a lot about their country from the Aborigines.